I never believed a single evening could bend the direction of a life so quietly, so completely. Yet that night, standing in my own living room, I felt something shift inside me, something I had ignored for far too long. For years, my days had been stitched together by routine, obligation, and a marriage that looked whole from the outside but felt hollow at the center. I didn't realize how empty I had become until the moment someone finally looked at me as though I wasn't invisible. And the painful truth was that it wasn't my husband. It was Aiden, my 23-year-old stepson, who walked into my summer that year and unknowingly touched the parts of me I had long buried. I wish I could say it happened suddenly, but it didn't. It happened slowly, softly, and so quietly that by the time I noticed the pull between us, the current had already taken me under. Daniel had left that morning for another business trip, another polite kiss, another brief smile that didn't reach his eyes. We had become the kind of couple who shared a house but not a life. Our voices echoed against walls instead of meeting each other. I had grown used to eating alone, sleeping alone, thinking alone. Loneliness had become a second presence in the house, silent, predictable, and strangely comforting. But everything shifted when Aiden arrived for the summer. He was supposed to stay only a few weeks, long enough to sort out his next steps before moving on to whatever life waited for him. I didn't expect him to alter anything. I certainly didn't expect him to alter me. At first, we moved around each other gently, the way strangers do when they share the same roof. He was polite, thoughtful, always offering to help carry groceries or fix the little things Daniel never seemed to have time for. There was a quietness to him, a searching softness in his eyes, as if he was trying to understand the world and himself at the same time. He laughed easily, too, an honest, warm laugh that filled the rooms in ways I hadn't heard in years. We spent mornings exchanging small talk over coffee, and evenings watching old movies while the ceiling fan hummed lazily above us. Nothing dangerous, nothing forbidden, not yet, but loneliness has a way of sharpening every emotion. It turns every glance into a question, every silence into a space where longing can grow. I didn't realize it was happening until one evening, when Daniel called to say he wouldn't be coming home. His voice was as casual as always, distant in a way that had become normal. I felt something slip inside me, not surprise, not anger, but the quiet ache of being forgotten again. After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, letting the soft flicker of the television wash over me. The house felt too large, too quiet, too alive with the things I'd stopped letting myself feel. Aiden came downstairs a little later, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing loose sweats that hung comfortably on his tall frame. His presence shifted the room before he even sat down. There was something different about him that night, his eyes softer, but more alert, as if he could sense the way my thoughts were unraveling. He sat across from me, knees drawn up, elbows resting casually, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt charged, though I didn't want to name it. Naming it would make it real. Naming it would make it dangerous. "You look lonely," he said finally, his voice low, almost hesitant. I tried to laugh, tried to brush it off with a joke, but the sound fell flat between us. Because it wasn't a lie. And because he was the first person in years who had dared to say it out loud. He watched me carefully, the way people watch fragile things. They don't want to break. I could feel his attention like a hand against my skin, warm, unsettling. Too aware, I noticed things I hadn't before, the way his gaze lingered a second too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the way he seemed to observe the smallest details: what I read, what I wore, how long I stared at empty rooms before looking away. His attention felt heavier than his words, and for the first time in a long time I felt seen, truly seen, and that frightened me more than anything. When he whispered, "I don't think Daniel deserves you," something inside me tightened. I told him to stop, to not say things like that. But the tremor in my voice betrayed me, because a part of me, a quiet, neglected part, didn't want him to stop. That part had been asleep for years, untouched by affection or tenderness, and suddenly it was wide awake, pulsing with an ache I didn't recognize. The moment stretched between us like a fragile thread. One wrong move and it would snap. One honest breath and it would pull us together. I should have walked away. I should have told him to go to bed. I should have closed every door between us. But I didn't, and the room felt smaller with every heartbeat. The days that followed that charged evening unfolded with a strange softness, as if the house itself sensed the shift between us. Nothing happened outright, not yet, but everything felt different. I became aware of Aiden in ways that startled me. I noticed the quiet footsteps he made in the hallway, the way he lingered for just a moment when he passed by, the way his eyes found me before his voice did. And I noticed something even more dangerous: how much I waited for it, how much I felt myself leaning toward the warmth he carried so effortlessly. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that I was imagining the tension, that I was reading too much into things. But every day, the space between us felt thinner, lighter, easier to cross. Daniel continued to call at odd hours, always with excuses that sounded rehearsed. I didn't bother asking where he was. He didn't bother offering details. Our conversations had become brief, transactional, and strangely polite, as though we were colleagues pretending to be married. When I hung up after one of his calls, I realized I felt more aware of the silence that followed than the voice that preceded it. And each time the phone clicked, I felt the distance between us stretch a little more. I then noticed that too, though he never said anything directly. He simply watched the way my shoulders slumped, the way my face shifted, the way I stared at the wall for a moment too long. His silence wasn't judgment, it was understanding. And that made it even harder to ignore. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Aiden walked in. There was nothing unusual about the moment: sunlight through the window, the soft clatter of dishes, but something about the way he paused in the doorway made my breath catch. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me with a quiet intensity that felt almost like a question. He wasn't ready to ask, "Do you ever get tired of doing everything alone?" he said softly. I froze for a moment, my hands still on the counter. It wasn't the question that startled me. It was the honesty in his tone, the gentle concern that threaded through those few simple words. I turned toward him slowly, unsure how to answer without revealing more than I should. "Sometimes," I whispered, "but I'm used to it." He stepped closer, only a few inches, but it felt like a shift in gravity. "You shouldn't have to be," he murmured. I wanted to say something, anything that would create space again, but my voice refused to move. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw not just the young man trying to find his place in the world, but someone who saw me in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be seen for years. The vulnerability in his gaze mirrored my own, and that made it harder to step back. Later that evening, we found ourselves sharing the couch again, watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to. The glow of the screen flickered across his face, softening his features. He sat close enough that the heat from his body reached me, but not so close that it crossed any obvious line. It was the in-between space that felt most dangerous, the almost, the not yet, the breath before something irreversible. At one point, he shifted slightly, his knee brushing mine. The touch was accidental, but the way he tensed told me he felt it too. My heartbeat stumbled in my chest. I didn't move away. I didn't tell him to be careful. I didn't remind him who we were supposed to be to each other. I just breathed quietly, as if inhaling too deeply would give away the storm gathering inside me. We talked late into the night. Not about us, not directly, but about everything else: his doubts about his future, his fear of disappointing his father, the loneliness he carried from childhood. I listened, my chest tightening with every confession he let slip. I saw the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. And somewhere between those two truths, something inside me softened without permission. He looked at me in a way I hadn't been looked at in years, as though my presence was a comfort rather than an obligation. When the clock edged past midnight, he leaned back against the couch, his eyes half tired, half unspoken. "Being here feels different," he said quietly, "like I'm not invisible." His voice trembled just enough to make my heart clench. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond without crossing a line we were already dangerously close to. "You're not invisible, Aiden," I said softly. "You never were." His eyes lifted to mine, slow and searching, and the look he gave me was not accidental. It was full, deliberate, and impossibly tender. The room felt too warm, the air too still. Every inch of space between us hummed with something. We could no longer pretend we didn't feel. He shifted closer, just a breath, just enough to feel his presence settle against me like a quiet confession. And for the first time, I didn't look away. The moment held us tightly, suspended in the delicate balance between restraint and surrender. My pulse thudded in my ears. His breath brushed faintly against my cheek. And then so gently I almost imagined it his fingers brushed the back of my hand. I didn't pull away. I told myself that the moment his fingers brushed mine, I would pull back. That I would break the spell before it deepened, before it became something neither of us could undo. But when the warmth of his touch settled over my hand, something inside me went still. Not in fear, not in confusion, but in recognition. A quiet, aching recognition of how long it had been since someone reached for me with sincerity instead of obligation. The silence between us felt heavy and delicate at the same time, like a truth we had both been trying to avoid finally taking shape in the dim glow of the living room. I whispered, not to stop him, but almost as if saying his name might steady the ground beneath us. He didn't move closer, but he didn't retreat either. His thumb traced the edge of my hand, slow and tentative, as though he feared the moment might shatter if he breathed too deeply. "You don't have to be alone," he murmured, his voice soft enough to blur with the quiet around us. The honesty in those words cut deeper than anything else, because for years, I had convinced myself that loneliness was easier than disappointment. That silence was easier than asking for something my marriage no longer held. I took a slow breath, trying to gather every reason, every rule, every line that should have kept us apart. They all appeared in my mind like fragile pieces of glass, clear, sharp, and easy to break. "This isn't simple," I said quietly. He nodded, his gaze steady, unwavering. "I know," he whispered, "but nothing has felt simple for a long time. For either of us." His voice trembled on that last line, and in that tremor, I heard a truth. We had both been circling for days. He shifted closer, just slightly, enough to close the impossible distance between hesitation and intention. I could feel the warmth of his shoulder near mine, the careful restraint in the way he held himself, waiting for my choice, not forcing his own. And somehow, that restraint, the quiet, trembling control pulled me in more deeply than any bold confession could have. I turned my hand slowly, letting my fingers slide lightly against his. His breath hitched, soft and unmistakable, and the air seemed to tighten around us. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, barely audible. The words were gentle, pleading, and unbearably sincere. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't pressure. It was an invitation to choose what kind of woman I wanted to be in the next breath. I swallowed, feeling my heart thud against my ribs. I should have said it. I should have drawn the line, put distance between us, protected us both. But instead, the truth slipped out in a trembling breath. "I can't." His eyes softened, almost breaking with relief. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand to my cheek. The tenderness of that touch undid something deep within me. Not passion, not recklessness, but the quiet ache of being seen, after years of fading into the corners of my own life. His thumb brushed my skin, a gesture too gentle to be dangerous, yet too intimate to deny. The room around us seemed to blur, the rest of the world fading into a distant hum. When his lips met mine, it wasn't urgent or wild. It was slow, hesitant, full of emotion instead of impulse. A kiss born not from desire alone, but from a loneliness we had both carried for far too long. The moment felt suspended, timeless, like a confession shaped in breath and warmth. When we finally pulled apart, the world felt different, warmer, heavier, more alive. I found myself leaning into him, drawn by a tenderness I hadn't realized I still yearned for. But morning has a way of bringing reality back into sharp focus. I woke early, the house wrapped in a quiet I didn't recognize. Guilt curled in my chest like a slow-forming ache, not because of regret, but because of the weight of what it meant. The lines we had crossed couldn't be erased. The choices we had made carried consequences we couldn't yet see. I walked into the kitchen with a heaviness in my steps, unsure of how to face the day. Aiden was already there, leaning against the counter, his expression soft but conflicted. He looked at me as though he wasn't sure if he had the right to speak first. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, though the truth was tangled somewhere inside me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Everything feels different." He stepped closer, not touching me this time, but letting his presence speak for him. "Different doesn't have to mean wrong," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out together." The sincerity in his voice hit me with unexpected force. For a moment, I let myself believe him, let myself feel the warmth of the possibility he offered. But as I stood there, watching him in the soft morning light, the reality of what lay ahead settled over me like a shadow. Daniel's absence, our choices, the fragile world we had stepped into without knowing where it would lead. And yet, when I then held my gaze, I felt something I couldn't deny, an unspoken promise, trembling and real, a promise that would demand more from both of us than either of us was ready to face.